A senior Russian general has just said out loud what few Western officials would dare to whisper, that Israel itself may not survive this war as a state. The warning comes from Russian Lieutenant General Apti Alaudinov, speaking to the state news agency TASS, and it arrives against a backdrop of a Middle East where the war with Iran refuses to end, and Israel shows no restraint in Gaza, Lebanon, or Syria. Alaudinov's argument is not that Israel is weak, it is that Israel is overreaching, deliberately widening the conflict to pull the United States, and eventually the wider NATO bloc, ever deeper into a war it cannot finish. And in that overreach, he says, Israel could fatally overestimate its own strength. Now, this is the assessment of a Russian military official, not a prophecy, and Israel is not on the verge of vanishing tomorrow. But the fact that a general in Moscow is willing to frame the stakes this way tells you how far this conflict has already traveled from the short war Washington once promised. Because the logic underneath his warning is the real story. Alaudinov is describing a trap, one in which Israel's strategy of escalation becomes the very thing that consumes it, drawing in outside powers until the war grows bigger than any single state can control. And to understand why a Russian general would say this now, you have to look at how the last 6 months actually unfolded, because the timeline is a chronicle of a ceasefire that never held. The United States and Israel launched their military operation against Iran on February 28th. By June, a memorandum of understanding was reached between Washington and Tehran, calling for an immediate halt to hostilities, including in Lebanon. On paper, the war was supposed to end there. It did not. On July 8th, the United States resumed large-scale strikes against Iran, accusing Tehran of violating agreements tied to the Strait of Hormuz. Then on August 2nd, Donald Trump said he had personally called off a planned massive strike on Iran, claiming that Iran and several Arab capitals had urged Washington to avoid another major attack. Read that sequence carefully, because it is the whole war in miniature. Strikes, a deal, more strikes, and a canceled strike announced as generosity. Diplomacy and bombardment running on the same track at the same time. This is the unpredictable, grinding confrontation that Alaudinov is watching from Moscow. And it is precisely this kind of war, one with no clean end, that tends to pull in more players rather than fewer. And one of those players has already chosen its side. Because in a stunning disclosure, Russia is reportedly shipping explosives to Iran to help it fight the United States. According to a European government document obtained by NBC News, Moscow is sending TNT drone parts and ammunition to Tehran to rebuild the missile and drone arsenal that months of war with America have worn down. And the route is as telling as the cargo. The deliveries allegedly move across the Caspian Sea, beyond the reach of Western navies, carried by more than 24 Russian ships, many of them already under sanctions. This is what a new phase of Russia-Iran military cooperation looks like, and analysts reading the document draw one clear conclusion from it: that US and Israeli strikes have hit Iran's weapons factories hard enough that Tehran now needs outside suppliers to refill its shelves. Russia and Iran are fighting two separate wars, but with Washington looming over both, they are leaning on each other to get through them, and Iran is not waiting with its hands empty. Because Tehran is rebuilding its battered air defenses, and it is doing so in public as a warning. Tehran's rebuilding also draws on homegrown systems it unveiled before this war: the domestically produced Arman anti-ballistic missile system and the Azarakhsh low-altitude defense system, which officials present as cheaper, more efficient alternatives to expensive foreign hardware. This matters because of what came before it. Israeli officials had previously claimed that around 80% of Iran's air defenses were destroyed during the March and April fighting. So every launcher Iran now rolls out on camera is a direct answer to that claim, a way of saying the shield you shattered is already being rebuilt, and the specifications Tehran attributes to these systems are designed to reassure Iranians and unsettle everyone else. Take the Arman first. According to Iran's defense ministry, which unveiled it in February 2024, it is a mobile, medium-range, high-altitude anti-ballistic system that can detect targets up to 180 kilometers away and engage them at 120, reaching threats as high as 27 kilometers. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and guided bombs alike. Tehran says it can track 24 targets at once, engage up to a dozen simultaneously, and go operational in under 3 minutes with a reaction time below 20 seconds. Then there is the Azarakhsh, meaning lightning, a low-altitude system mounted on a light 4x4 so it can move, deploy, and vanish alongside troops or around critical sites, with a phased array radar reaching 50 kilometers and infrared sensors that Iran says can track targets 25 kilometers out, even in poor visibility. It carries 4 ready-to-fire infrared missiles, reportedly derived from upgraded Sidewinder technology, built to knock down drones, cruise missiles, and helicopters. Layer these claims onto what Iranian officials describe as the hypersonic Fatah missile, with its reported 1,400-kilometer range, and the message becomes unmistakable. Iran wants the world to believe it can now contest its own skies. But the most explosive part of the rebuilding effort is the part Iran is not showing on camera, because the rebuilding may reach far beyond domestic production. Iranian opposition figures have told the outlet MBN that Iran obtained hundreds of Chinese and Russian shoulder-fired air defense missiles during recent ceasefire periods, claims that MBN could not independently verify, and that Iran, China, and Russia have not publicly confirmed. Attribute that clearly because it is a contested claim from opposition sources. But the detail is striking. The sources describe around 400 Chinese QW-12 and FN-16 launchers arriving through 4 shipments via Pakistani airspace, and roughly 300 Russian Verba systems arriving across the Caspian in 5 shipments, dispersed to Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad, the Iraqi border, and ports near the Strait of Hormuz, with some passed on to allied groups in Iraq. If even a fraction of that is accurate, it describes exactly the kind of quiet resupply that turns a battered force back into a dangerous one. And it points to the single scenario that Washington fears most. Because here, even a skeptic sees the danger. The claims arrive after Iran's air defenses suffered real damage in the spring, and analysts are careful to note the limits. Shoulder-fired missiles alone cannot overturn American air superiority. They threaten low-flying aircraft, but they would become early targets for US intelligence and precision strikes. And yet their biggest impact, as one strategic analyst put it, could be psychological. Because in a war this saturated with propaganda, shooting down even a single American aircraft would hand Tehran an enormous symbolic victory, without changing the underlying balance of power at all. That is the equation that should worry Washington. Iran does not need to defeat the US Air Force. It only needs one clear image, one downed jet, one captured crew, to prove that the empire bleeds. Step back, and every thread of this story pulls in the same direction. A Russian general predicting Israel's collapse, reported Russian explosives crossing the Caspian, opposition claims of Chinese launchers moving through Pakistani skies, Iranian air defenses being rebuilt after heavy losses. None of it means Israel disappears tomorrow. All of it means the war Washington promised would be quick has instead become the one thing it can least afford, a long one. The world is watching, and so far, no one is blinking. Subscribe to WLA for daily geopolitical analysis.